Hey everyone, so today what we're going to do is cover pages 96 to 102. All right, so when you're doing this reading, you should have been reading sort of to determine what most people believe justifies their lack of intervention. Remember, this whole town is really feeling the guilt for what happened, and they're all dealing with it in different ways. So that's something that you should be looking for as you read this section. And then specifically what happens to Cristo Bayota, Flora Miguel, Don Riaglo de la Flor. What happened to these people? Okay. And that's sort of what you were looking for as you started reading through this part. So here we go. In this whole section, we've got people who are trying to deal with their own guilt. How should we deal with the guilt? What are the things that they should do? It says the clocks of dawn would catch us trying to give order to the chain of the many chance events that had made the absurdity possible. And it was obvious that we weren't doing it from an urge to clear up mysteries, but because none of us could go on living without an exact knowledge of the place and mission assigned to us by fate. So we are sort of attributing this to fate. This was supposed to happen. It was a thing that was supposed to happen. It was a common anxiety among the people. So the whole town feels like, how did this happen? How come I didn't play my part? Like, what part did I play? So Cristo Bayota, one of his friends, he goes on to become a surgeon. He never managed to explain to himself why he gave in to the impulse to spend 2 hours at his grandparents' house until the bishop came, instead of going to rest at his parents' house, because they had been waiting for him since dawn to warn him. So Cristo Bayota could have had the information if only he had gone to his own house. So that's interesting. So fate sort of stepped in and sent him where he needed to go. Now, most of those who could have done something to prevent the crime and did not consoled themselves with this idea that honor is a sacred monopoly and it only gives access to people who are part of the drama. Honor is love, I heard my mother say. So they believed they consoled themselves or made themselves feel better by telling themselves, listen, it was a thing of honor. And honor is love, and we can't step in the way of that because the heart has to take care of what it has to take care of. So people try to convince themselves using this flimsy argument. Now, remember Hortensia Bout? She's the one who saw the boys walking before they killed Santiago, but they thought they saw blood on the knives. She thought she saw blood on their knives. It was just a hallucination. It wasn't really there. The fact that she saw that and uh, she saw 2 bloody knives that weren't really bloody yet, that hallucination just drove her crazy, made her sort of lose her mind. She winds up running out into the street naked, like literally loses her mind, I think. Now, Flora Miguel, she is Santiago's fiance. She was supposed to marry him at Christmas time, but when she found out what he'd been accused of and that he'd been killed, she runs away out of spite with the lieutenant of the border patrol. She runs away with this guy, and he ends up prostituting her to all the rubber workers. So this is no good for her, right? Her life turned out pretty bad. This other person that we didn't really mention this person before, Aurora Villeros. She was a midwife, and she brought many of the children into the world, including Santiago. She ends up suffering this spasm of the bladder when she heard what happened, and had to use a catheter in order to urinate. This urination thing keeps coming up over and over again. I've tried to look it up before. I've never really find anything. What I can attribute this to, because remember, Pedro has trouble with his urinating. This woman has trouble with urinating. I think maybe it has something to do with guilt, being unable to get that guilt out of their lives. Now, this guy, Don Riaglo de la Flor, that's Clotilde Armante's good husband. Remember at the beginning, he didn't believe her when she tries to tell them. She's like, listen, there's a problem here. I think these boys are going to kill him. And he's like, oh, stop. It's just drunkards talk. They're never going to do anything, right? He actually got up for the very last time, and he was looking out the door, and his physically saw how Santiago Nassar had been hewn to bits against the locked door of his own house, and he did not survive the shock. So he must have had a heart attack when that happened. Really, really sad. Now, Placidia Linario, this is super sad. So let's talk about what happened with Placidia Linario. Remember, this is Santiago's mom. So what happens with her? Well, at the last minute, she locked the door. Remember, Davina Fleur left that door unlocked? Well, Davina told Placidia that she saw Santiago come in the house. He is in the house. But it wasn't true. And she didn't know it wasn't true. And she locked the door at the last second. So she locks the door and leaves her son outside getting chopped up against this door. She feels a lot of guilt, but she ends up freeing herself from the blame because she says Davina swore that the son came in, and so she believed her when that happened. On the other hand, she never forgave herself for having mixed up augury with trees with the unlucky one of birds, and she starts chewing on these peppercress seeds, which is apparently a really bad habit. I'm not sure what that does, but it can't be good for you. Probably has some sort of a harmful effect because pernicious means harmful effect, right? Did you look that up? That was one of your words. So as we continue, we have 12 days after the crime. The investigating magistrate comes to town. So the investigator comes to town, and he calls the town an open wound. What's that mean? Well, an open wound, this is a metaphor, obviously. We're calling the town an open wound. A wound is something when you've been injured, right? So this town is injured and it's still bleeding. It hasn't healed itself yet 12 days after the crime. Because remember, people are still having that smell of Santiago. It's just all the memories of all of the things that happened regarding his death. This was something terrible for the entire family. So everyone comes running to see him, which is interesting, running to see this guy to tell them their role in the story. Like, hey, here's what I saw. I saw this happen. I saw this happen. And they're all there trying to fill him in. Well, it just so happened that this guy was a brand new investigator, so he really doesn't classify the files in any special way. And the place where they keep this stuff, the headquarters, right, it got flooded by high tides, and all of the volumes of information that are there started floating around. And so when our narrator goes back, he is only able to find 322 pages of the more than 500 pages that the brief should have contained. So that's interesting. It does mention our guy who is doing the writing, who has made these notes, right? Notes. Interestingly enough, the pen that he uses for the notes makes it look as if things were written in blood. This is the judge who's making notes on the file. So the judge is making these notes, but look at this. He was perplexed by the enigma that fate had touched him with, and he fell into lyrical distractions that ran contrary to the rigor of his profession. Meaning, judges are supposed to be pretty straightforward, like, look at the facts, here it is. But he's just perplexed by this entire situation. This whole thing is crazy. There were so many coincidences in this situation that nothing should have ever happened. He says this death was clearly foretold. People knew about it and people didn't do anything. So he's a little perplexed by that. Now, here's a little bit about Santiago. Ready? Nevertheless, what had alarmed him the most at the conclusion of his excessive diligence was not having found a single clue that Santiago had been the cause of the wrong. So in all of those paperwork, all of those 500 pages, he never found a clue, not a single thing that showed that Santiago could have been the perpetrator here. Angela Vicario is the only person who knows. She never told her friends. This was a secret, something she kept to herself. It says she told us about the miracle, but not the saint, meaning she told them that she had had sex, but not who it was. Angela didn't budge. She continued to say that that's who it was, that it was Santiago. She's never going to give this up. But no one sees any proof of that anywhere. The investigating magistrate doesn't see anything either. He feels like his good work has been sort of ruined in a sense because he cannot find anything to validate this idea. He does say this, give me a prejudice and I will move the world. So this is something you should have sort of talked about. Give me a prejudice and I will move the world. So what does this mean? Well, how about the prejudice of honor, right? Honor, this idea of honor has taken away all other rational consideration that these people might have. All the innocent bystanders, the accusers, the witnesses of this murder, everybody is sort of guilty because of this, because of their idea of honor, their prejudice towards honor. All the other stuff is sort of erased because of the demand of honor. So honor is sort of getting in the way. It's moving the world. It's changing things so that it was allowed to happen. Now, Santiago Nassar, look at this. Santiago Nassar's closest friends, the victim's very behavior during his last hours was overwhelming proof of his innocence. On the morning of his death, Santiago Nassar hadn't had a moment of doubt, in spite of the fact that he knew very well what the price of the insult imputed to him was. He didn't know. He didn't know what was going on. He must have understood that the twin's simple nature was incapable of resisting an insult. No one would know. There were lots of people who really did like Santiago. There were some people who didn't like him very much, of course, as is with everybody. So people that didn't like him said, you know what, his serenity wasn't innocence, but it was cynicism. Like, meaning he thought highly of himself. He thought he was untouchable, so that's why he didn't feel guilty. But other people felt differently about it, for sure. So, interestingly, another thing that happened, another way fate sort of stepped in, this person right here, last name Pardo, he is good friends with Santiago, and Clotilde knows that. So she lets him know. She's like, listen, you've got to go warn him. You have to warn him. Pedro's like, it doesn't matter if you warn him. He's good as dead anyways. I'm going to kill him. But they all know the bonds. The twins know the bond between this Pardo guy and Santiago Nassar. And they probably thought that he was just the right person to stop it. Remember, they're telling everybody what's going on. So they make sure they tell this guy who's really good friends with Santiago what's going to happen. But when this guy sees Santiago, he's being led by the arm by Cristo Bayota over by the shops at the dock. And he doesn't warn him. He doesn't even go up to him. He just kind of gives him a pat on the back and walks away. He doesn't say anything. So this guy who definitely should have said something because of how close they were, this decided not to. He just lost his nerve for some reason. And he never tells them. Also, this is sort of like the dream at the beginning. Remember when he was flying through and he wasn't hitting anything? Well, look at this. Cristo and Santiago are walking through the town. The people are breaking up and heading towards the square. It was a thick crowd, but the two boys, Santiago and Cristo, were just walking through the center without any difficulty, inside an empty circle, right? Nobody was touching him. No one was going near him because they all knew that Santiago Nassar was about to die. Cristo Bayota remembered that there was a strange attitude towards them. He said that the people were all looking at him like their faces were painted, right? But even with that, nobody said anything. Nobody came and said one single word. Even this person, Sarah Norija, she was opening her shoe shop when they passed by, and she actually felt scared because she saw how pale he was. But again, she didn't say anything. So fate stepped in so many different ways and stopped all of these people from playing their part, from stopping this murder. They're all dealing with their guilt, all dealing with their part by simply saying, you know, honor is love, and I can't get involved in the affairs of love. And they're all kind of dealing with things in their own particular way.